Hello and welcome to the second episode of Surprisingly Even podcast. My name is Judit and this podcast is about knitting, which is my hobby and my favorite thing to do. I live and knit in Toronto, Canada. However, today we are out of town, so I'm speaking to you from Canadian cottage country, which will explain some of the soundtrack you may be hearing during this episode and dog barking or noises from the boats on the lake, so apologies in advance for that. I can be found on Ravelry as JuditNJulia. It's been 2 weeks since I recorded the last episode, which was also the very first episode of this podcast. I found that to be an extremely fun and rewarding experience, so here I am making the second one for your viewing pleasure. Would like to thank the returning viewers for joining me today. And these are most likely my friends and family at this point. Thank you guys for all your support and encouraging comments. You've been a great source of inspiration for me. And if you are a new viewer, welcome to my knitting world. And I hope you will enjoy this episode as much as I'm enjoying making it for you. I did get a lot of useful advice and tips from the audience on my first episode, which I am already incorporating with this one. So if you can see on the YouTube channel, there is now a logo, a banner art, courtesy of my very artistic and talented daughter, Rhea. So thank her very much for that. I will try to incorporate the other very useful advice as I go through this podcast and continue making this better. One question I got was why I'm not wearing any of the stuff I'm knitting on the podcast. So before we get into the bulk of the content, I would like to correct that oversight on my part and actually put on this shawl, which let me put it on the right way. I was actually wearing it throughout the morning, and this is my cottage shawl. This is Hansel Hat pattern by Gudrun Johnston, and it's made out of the original yarn the pattern is written for, which is Jameson and Smith's 2-ply. It's a very traditional rustic yarn, and this is a very traditional pattern for a hat. And a hat is a term for like a shawl, if you will. And this is a half square version of this pattern. This pattern comes in two versions, a full square and a half square, which is effectively triangle. And I really, really like it. It's not the most luxurious or intricate pattern shawl that I've made, but it's definitely one of the most used ones because this shawl lives at our cottage, and I do reach for it a lot when we're here on chilly nights or mornings. So it's getting a lot of love and wear. So this is a proof that I do wear stuff that I knit. So for those of you who doubt it, actually let me put this aside for a minute because it may make the logistic challenging in terms of me showing you stuff. That's one useful advice in action. We will continue incorporating the rest as we go. Since we don't have any admin stuff to deal with, let us dive into the subject matter of the podcast, which is knitting. I will be talking about things I work on by object type, starting with garments, then going into shawls and progressing to smaller accessories. And within each of the categories, we'll be covering past, present, future type of thing in terms of what objects I recently may have finished, what I'm currently working on, and any plans for the future. These last 2 weeks have been fairly productive knitting-wise for me. I have 3 finished objects to show you guys, some of the new cast-ons, so stay tuned. There's a lot of exciting content coming up. And we will start with the garments. So in the garments department, last time we spoke, I had one project on my needles, which is the Rhea cardigan by Pam Allen, and the pattern is published by Quince & Co. At that time, I was debating whether I should finish this project now or put it on hold because this cardigan is written, and I'm making it in the original pattern. It's written in the original yarn. It's written for Kestrel by Quince & Co., which is 100% organic linen, heavier weight yarn because it has this interesting and maybe somewhat unique construction in the sense that it's a knitted chain, which is quite thick. The project has been taking me longer than I anticipated, and obviously since it's made out of linen, it's meant to be worn in the summer, and it's unlikely I'll be finishing it in time for me to get a lot of wear during this summer, which is almost over now, sadly. So I was debating whether I should be putting it on hold, but then I gave it some thought and the verdict is in, and I decided to continue with it and finish it now. That way it will be all ready for me for the next summer season, and I will not have a lingering UFO, which would be weighing heavily on my knitting conscience, because one things I have hard time tolerating as lingering unfinished objects. For those of you who are not knitters, UFO stands for unfinished object, and I feel the need to explain the terminology to people who are not necessarily deep into the knitting lingo, because I got some interesting questions after the last episode. For example, what do you mean you used to be monogamous but crave more variety? So I realized I need to be careful and explain myself. Anyway, back to Rhea cardigan. So I decided to continue knitting on it and finish it now, so that I don't have a unfinished business, so to speak, trailing into the next summer season. Last time we spoke, let me show you where I am with it now. Last time we spoke, I was about here, and I did have a progress marker, but it's slipped away. I did make a notable progress on the body, and I'm now at the point where I'm about to start splitting into the sleeves. There are a couple of increases that need to happen prior to that, which I will do next, and then I will split into sleeves. Hope next time we talk about the body will either be finished or close to finished, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to start the sleeves at that point. I guess time will tell. I did do some, I did make some changes to the pattern in terms of I did not necessarily do the waist shaping the waist proposed in the pattern. I kind of skipped shaping the waist on the sides, and instead I introduced some shaping in the back. So this is the panel that goes in the middle of the back. I shaped a bit here because I thought it would be a more flattering fit for me. We'll see if I was right. That's where I am with this. Let me talk a little bit about the experience of knitting with Kestrel, because this is my first time working with this yarn. I'm saying it's a very interesting experience in the sense that this yarn is not like that butter soft merino or cashmere or something that would just glide along and kind of carry you with it. And this yarn is more of a rougher kind of texture, so it kind of makes you work for the result, if you will. So it creates this fabric that it's visually very heavy and drapey, but it's actually not as heavy because the yarn itself is a chain, so it's not a solid strand. I have a feeling that the end result, I may either love or hate the end result. I rather hope for love. The more I knit with it, the more I'm inclined to like the feeling of it. Especially I know that linen tends to soften with wash and wear, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I like the color, I like the texture so far, even though it's not as smooth of a ride as I'm used to with other types of fibers. But it's definitely an experience that I think every knitter should try at least once in a while, just to see how we feel with different types of fibers and textures. I think that's part of the whole experience, so highly recommend it. But the verdict is still out on the end result. I guess we'll have to wait and see. We'll continue working on it and keeping you up to date on the progress. As far as plans for my next garment I'm going to knit, last time we spoke, I was leaning strongly towards making this pullover. It's called, I believe it's called the Ivory Shirt, and it's from the Artisan book by Helga Isager. I really love this pattern. The look of it is very feminine and elegant and timeless in a way. I was planning to make it out of this yarn, and this is Yak Singles by the Wool Barn, and it's 4-ply finger and weight yarn, 65 superwash merino, 20 silk, 15 yak. I even produced a swatch for it. Let me show it to you. The bottom portion is done on 275 millimeter, and the top portion is done on 3.0 millimeter, which is the recommended needle size in the pattern, but obviously they are working with a different yarn, so I'm not sure how much the recommendation applies here. But coincidentally, I quite like the texture I was able to produce on 3 millimeter needles, because this one, I don't know, it feels too dense for this kind of yarn. The fabric, it turns out to be quite airy. I'm not sure if it would be a good fit for that specific pattern, because the yarn didn't bloom quite as much as I hoped. So this would be like a layering piece, and I wanted that pullover to be like a self-sufficient type of thing that I wouldn't have to layer on top of anything. Also, I haven't worked with this specific yarn before, or with this yak fiber previously, so I looked at Ravelry to see if there are any reviews for this yarn, and I didn't find any, so I'm not quite sure what to expect in terms of future behavior, because I can see a bit of a halo on this swatch. I'm not sure if you can see, if it comes through in the camera. I can see a bit of halo, so I'm wondering if I need to worry about pilling potentially in the future. Anyway, for anything that would pill, I guess a shawl would make more sense than a garment. But then I really want this to be a garment, because I have a garment worth amount of this. I have 3 skeins, and each skein is 480 meters or 525 yards, which is definitely more than enough. So now I'm thinking maybe not this specific pattern. I don't know. I spent the bulk of this morning browsing Ravelry for patterns that would work with this yarn. There's a lot of choices always, and there are a few options that I'm considering. I'm thinking maybe this would be like a cardigan rather than a pullover, because I'm trying to think in the context of my wardrobe. I think I would get more use out of this kind of neutral color cardigan to throw over like dresses or sleeveless tops. So we need to have a conversation and decide what this yarn wants to be or needs to be. We'll let you know. So this is where we are with future plans in the garment department. I will move on to shawls. Very excitingly, I have a finished objects. I finished shawl to show you guys today. You can probably, for those of you who watched the previous episode, you can probably guess what it is, because I was raving about this on and on and on, and it was fairly close to completion. That would be the Exploration Station shawl I knit, and the pattern is, of course, by Stephen West. It's probably one of the most known patterns in Ravelry, and it has like a million people who's knit it, and I'm one of the last ones to join the party. But anyway, I'm very pleased with the results in all aspects. My color selection, the size, the pattern, the overall visual impact, and it fits really well with my wardrobe and color scheme. So let me just show it to you. So here she is, Exploration Station, and all finished and done, blocked, ends mended, good to go. I really love the I-cord finishing along the top edge and also at the bottom. It gives it structure here, weight at the bottom, which adds even more to the whole overall impact. And in terms of the size, as you can see, it's perfect. It's not too big, not too small, just like the Goldilocks, just right. And the way I wear it, usually I like to wear it in a slightly asymmetrical manner. So something like this, and this part is right here, and it's like really interesting. Like, and there's so much going on in this pattern. As simple as it is, there's so much variety of textures and color combinations. So no matter how you put it on yourself or how you drape it, there'll always be something to catch the eye and generate interest. So I predict I'll be getting a lot of compliments on this. Can't wait to wear it. And this is actually one of the few cases when I may actually make another one. And it's a great opportunity to use like odd skeins with colors that you don't necessarily know what to do on their own, but putting them together into something like this, it's a great. So yeah, exploration station. If you're a knitter and haven't made this yet, I highly recommend it. It's like the rite of passage. For me, it was a gateway into Steve West patterns, and this is definitely not the last one I'll be making. I already start thinking about the next couple that I should kind of add to my queue, which is ever growing. In terms of the work in progress in the shawls area, as promised last time and as discussed, I started on the Time Trades shawl, and it's a fairly new pattern by Caitlin Hunter. I don't think it's been released on Ravelry yet, but it was available with the purchase of a kit. I can't remember the name of the store, but I assume these kits must have been curated by the designer. So the kit consisted of a set of mini gradient set, and in this case, for this specific colorway, it's a mini set from Sweet Georgia, and it's called Party of 5. And the colors are ranging from like black to very light gray. The other two skeins in the kit were these speckled or variegated yarns. One is by Primrose Yarn, and it's single ply fingering, Adelaide base, and the color is Thrush. And the other skein is Farmer's Daughters Fibers, and it's Rocky Mountain Pearls, 80% superwash BFL, 20% nylon, and the color is Jellystone. So it all looks lovely. The only thing I haven't had an experience combining plied yarn with a single in one project, so I guess I'll have the opportunity to try that now, and we'll let you know how it goes. I cast it on right after I finished Exploration Station and managed to make a fair bit of progress on it. So let me show you where I am. So it's kind of, yeah, it's shaped like a wrap, but it's kind of angled. I am now on the 4th color in the gradient set, and then I will proceed knitting with the colored with these two. So kind of can't wait. I discovered that I don't really enjoy knitting this dark color. I don't know whether that makes sense, but it just felt kind of dull and depressing. So, but progressively as the color lightened up, my mood, I guess, improved. So the things are getting lighter, knitting mood-wise, along the progress of the shawl. Yeah, I can't wait starting to knit with a bit of a colorful skein. I don't know, maybe my knitting on a fade sweater and Steve West patterns, maybe I developed addiction for color and speckle. I guess we'll see. About the pattern, it's fairly straightforward. One thing I found surprisingly tricky is I kept losing track of lace repeats, and that's not usually happening to me. I usually have no trouble reading where I am and kind of knowing what to do next. But in this case, even though the lace part of it is relatively simple, I kept kind of messing it up and having to go back and fix it, which was mildly annoying, but also humbling in a way, because it's like relatively easy lace chart and I was having all these troubles. So I ended up using stitch markers between repeats, and that kind of fixed it right away. I could tell where I was off, and I believe the problem is that there are a few rows of with no lace action, if so to speak, in between, which is kind of makes it hard for you to follow where exactly you are and lace pattern wise. But stitch markers between repeats, highly recommended. Now things are going relatively smoothly, so hoping to be making progress and moving on to these colors soon. As I mentioned, I'm on the 4th color of the gradient, so I only have one more repeat of this with the last color, and then I'll be off to knitting with these. So that's in the works. Very excited about finishing this, because I already have my daughter, who is the client for this shawl, inquiring where I am and when it's going to be ready. So soon, hopefully, fingers crossed. If if I don't get distracted by other things like making the podcast. As far as future plans in Shawls department, there are options, which is always good, but can be overwhelming sometimes. So I could either make the second one right away, because as I mentioned last time, I have 2 kits of these of yarn for this pattern. One actually in this colorway that's depicted in the sample. This was bought for me for my birthday by my daughter, and I can't wait to start making it, because this picture is actually not doing it justice to the colors that are included in this kit. They're much more vibrant and deep, I find, in real life. So can't wait to make this. Or if I feel like I want a palette cleanser in between 2 shawls that are exactly the same, I could do some brioche Stephen West shawl, because I do have leftovers from exploration station. So I have these, and there was a 4th color, modern fair isle. I thought I could use this as a kind of a neutral base and have 2 color brioche with stripes, like it's using this as a background, stripes of different colors like these, and I have like this one and this one, and this is Malabrigo that I've had in my stash for a while. I can't even remember what I bought it for now. I think this was supposed to be also double 2 color brioche, some sort of a shawl, but I've moved on from that idea since. So maybe a Stephen West pattern will help me find a nice home for these, because this wouldn't be enough if I start using it as a background color to do multi-stripes. So I also had this Malabrigo, which looks quite similar to this, so I guess we could use this together, and that's just striping the other colors, and could also introduce some pops of neon stripes. I think that would really give it extra something, if I had introduced pops of like yellow neon or pink or coral. Anyway, look at me making it up as I go. So yeah, lots of plans in the shawl department. I wish I had another pair of hands and more hours in a day. So let's move on to talk about smaller accessories. We'll start with hats, and I do have a finished object, a finished hat, which you've seen before when it was still a work in progress, and it's this hat. It's a very popular free pattern on Ravelry. It's Antler Hat by tincanknits. I highly recommend it. It's a very straightforward, simple, quick cabled pattern. It gives you flexibility. Depends on how much slouch you want. You can knit longer or start decreasing sooner. So this was done for my husband, and he likes his hats fitting fairly closely to his head. So that's why I made it fairly short. Yeah, it's pretty nice. And Shelter worked. Shelter works really well for this kind of pattern. I was almost able to squeeze it out of one skein of Shelter, but then had to break into the second one just for the very last 2 or 3 rows, which is like, oh, so close. Anyway, this is the hat. I'm really happy with it. So is my husband. So nothing bad to say about it, only good things. Highly recommend the pattern. I'm pretty sure I will be using it again. This will be my go-to when I need a quick gift for someone, or just to use up some leftovers. This is great, and it comes in different sizes, so that's always a good thing. I do have a hat that I'm working on right now. It's work in progress, and that's a flame hat pattern by it's a flame hat pattern by Irina Dmitrieva. I got this for. So I knit the ribbing, did the first increase row, and I'm about ready to start the body of the hat, which will be this elaborate cabling pattern. The reason I haven't started it yet, I usually when I start that kind of thing, I want to finish it in one shot. So I was looking for a meaningful chunk of time that I would be able to spend with it, which may or may not happen this weekend. Let's see how things progress. I would have made more progress on this, and again, excuses, but definitely would have made more progress if I didn't have to knit this ribbing 3 times. So a backstory, this was originally, I had intended to knit this hat using a different pattern, which is part of the same bundle by Irina Dmitrieva, and I swatched and everything, and my gauge matched, and that pattern called for rib done on 120 stitches cast on. So I did the rib for that pattern, and I felt it was a bit loose. So I don't know, maybe it depends on how loose or tight you like your hats fitting. I'm just, my experience, hats tend to stretch, so I would rather them be rather like more on the snuggly side, at least in the beginning. So I decided I need a smaller size hat for this specific yarn and needle size. So I looked at the bundle, and she had this flame, and flame hat pattern is asking for 108 stitches cast on, which is smaller, perfect size. So I promptly cast on 108 stitches, knit the ribbing, and then I realized that I had knit 2x2 ribbing, and the flame hat pattern is calling by 2x1, is calling for 2x1 2 knit 1 purl ribbing, and for a good reason, because you know, cabled hats, like the better patterns for cabled hats, they tend to kind of match ribbing to the cabling on the body to make sure that it kind of flows is incorporated into the cabling. And as much as I wanted to kind of proceed with the 2x2 ribbing I had knit, it wouldn't look right, so I ripped it out. This is my 3rd version, which is hopefully is the charm. I'm hoping next time we talk, this would be a finished or close to finished object. We'll see how things progress. Forgot to mention, I'm making this out of Cumbria by the Fibre Company. This is my first time knitting with Cumbria. I love the experience so far. This is a non-superwash yarn, but it's not as rustic as some of the other non-superwashes are. So it has 10% mohair, and mohair is just one of those things you add it to anything and it instantly feels more luxurious. So I'm really enjoying it so far. So I for sure will be using it in the future for other things, and maybe even a garment. We'll see. I have enough. I have 2 skeins, which should be enough to finish this hat and also produce a pair of mittens. These are going to go to my mom, who's been asking me for a beige beret forever, so she will be getting it now. I also wanted to talk about some future plans in the hats department. In terms of future plans for hats, I have options, which is great. So I have these shelter leftovers, which would be enough for me to produce a small like color work hat, but this would have been my main color, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I usually prefer the main color to be more of a neutral like canvas base as opposed to something like this. Even though like this is a lovely color, just maybe would rather use it as an accent. So I was thinking that maybe if I have leftovers of Cumbria, which I'm working with on the hat I was talked about previously, maybe we can do something like this for a color work hat. Of course, I would be combining very different textures because shelter is very tweedy. I have no words to describe it, but those of you who worked with shelter, they know how unique the texture of this yarn is. So I would be combining this with Cumbria, but I think it may work. I think it may give it actually a very interesting effect. So I don't know. I think I might just try it. We'll see. And the other option in the hats is I have this amount of Crybaby color of hedgehog fiber sock yarn, and this is a precious leftover from my fade sweater. This is the color I used at the very top of the sweater. I have more of it left than the other colors because since it's at the top, I wasn't required to use it for the sleeves. That's why I have more left. So I just didn't have the heart to put this into my blanket. Obviously that would make for a lot of squares in the blanket, but I think it would make a lovely thing kind of transitional weather hat for a young girl, or I don't know, or even myself. I don't know, we'll see. Not that I'm not a young girl, mind you. I would probably want to knit a hat with this one, and I think it should be quick and very enjoyable knit because I love knitting with this color. Like all these speckles popping out, like just looking at it makes me instantly happy. Like seriously. So these are my options for hats. And the next I wanted to talk about mittens. So as you may remember, I had finished pair of mittens I showed to you on the last episode. That was my sunflower mittens. And at that time, I was having a bit of a crisis of genre with colorwork mittens because I was not entirely happy with how those turned out. They still look beautiful, and I love the colors I use in those, and I will continue using them. But there were some kinks along the way that made me kind of think that I may not be making colorwork mittens for a while, but then 15 seconds after I thought that, I watched the latest episode of Skeindeer podcast, and Ellie announced her Selbu Mittens club, and 5 seconds later I clicked on subscribe. So here I am. I did receive the first pattern in the club right away, and last time we spoke I said that I would be using Shelter for it in these two colors, which is leftovers from these two hats. And what could be better than using leftovers to produce something beautiful? And that's exactly what happened. I have a finished pair of Selbu mittens, and I'm about to show them to you right now. Look, isn't that just gorgeous? And I'm not just saying this because I made them. I'm just really, really happy with how these turned out. I can totally get the fascination and why so many people keep making colorwork mittens, even though there are only so many pairs a person needs, really. But the way these come out, it's like they're like objects of art. Like seriously, I would totally frame these and display them for people to admire. And again, not just because I was the one who made them. I'm just fascinated by the intricacy of the pattern. And you know, these are very traditional patterns, mind you, and thank you, Ellie, so much for making them popular and bringing to us the Norwegian traditional these kinds of patterns. I think this is great. And as I knit on them, I was thinking, you know, these people who came up with these patterns, they could have made something much more like simpler and more like utilitarian. Instead, they chose to take time and thought and produce something also that is also very, very beautiful. Even though it made more work, more thought, fewer mittens produced, they still thought it was important to make something beautiful and intricate and kind of that would also be pleasing to the eye and not just purely functional. So yeah, such deep thoughts occur to me when I knit, and there is nothing interesting on television. Anyway, really pleased with these. However, there's always a but. I had a brief inconsistency scare again. So as you may remember, I had this problem with my last pair that I made, that one mitten turned considerably larger than the other for no good reason, other than there was a break of 2 or 3 weeks in between them. On this one, I noticed that one was also going to be a bit smaller, but then I kind of fixed it. So I don't think it's noticeable. Anyway, we'll try to be more mindful. Actually, I'm thinking that as much as I enjoy knitting on different things at the time and kind of having breaks, I think I may need to make exception when it comes to colorwork mittens. I think for me, personally, colorwork mittens may be one of those things that you just have to finish in one shot if you want one to match the other. Because, I don't know, for some reason, for me, this is not always the case. Also, because the yarn is thicker than what the pattern calls for, and I had to use thicker needle, these are a bit too big for me. So as much as I love them and enjoyed making them, I think these are more like man size. So I will be giving them as a gift to my brother-in-law. His birthday is coming up shortly in September, so he'll be getting these mittens with this hat. And I hope he likes them, because I certainly do. Okay, so this was a finished objects and mittens department, and as I mentioned, I did sign up for Ellie's Mittens Club, and the next pattern is supposed to be released September 1st, I believe, and I can't wait for that. I already have yarn. So I bought these two skeins, and these are Blue Sky Fibers, wool stock. This one is red rock color, and this one is driftwood. I believe these two together will make a beautiful pair of colorwork mittens. This is the same yarn as I used for my sunflower mittens. I really enjoyed working with it. I find it to be really soft and very nice next to skin, even though it's not superwash. So I kind of highly recommend it. Plus it's fairly affordable, so that's great. And because I know that I'm now a member of the Mitten Club and there will be more patterns coming my way, I picked up another color combo from the same yarn. So this is like beautiful, like it looks almost black on camera, but it's really like dark teal, and this gray to go with it. So the two, I think, would make a really nice combo for mittens. So this color is called Gray Harbor, and this one is called Midnight Sea, which I think is an awesome name. And again, same brand, Blue Sky Fibers, woolstock worsted. So I really cannot wait to make these. So, but I think I'll use these ones first, and these ones will go for the subsequent pattern. We have all plans aligned and everything good to go. So well set there in the mittens department. And of course, I'll have to make a pair to match to go with this hat, and I already have a pattern in mind for that. So we are done with hats, mittens. A quick update on socks. The sock situation is that I still have this work. I'm still working on the same pair that I showed to you last time we spoke. It's Mercury socks pattern. I did make a bit of progress on them. So last time we spoke, we were here. Now I'm here. Pretty much done with the leg. It's as long as I want it to be. We'll be starting on a heel shortly using this contrasting color. I'll be making the Fish Lips Kiss short row heel because that's the one that fits me best. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you what yarn this is. As I mentioned before, I bought it at Toronto's Knitters Frolic this spring, and I bought these colors together with the intention of doing exactly this, making socks with combining these two, and I think they work beautifully. I'm really pleased with how this is looking. Yeah, nothing much to write home about. It's a Mercury sock pattern, 3 pattern Ravelry. Very popular. Many people are knitting on it. I'm hoping we'll be done. Hoping to be able to spend more time with these and be done with them and cast on another pair soon. This is where we are with socks. So the next object I want to talk about was the one I got the most compliments on after the first episode of this podcast. And if you can't guess what it is, it's the Coziest Memories blanket. The most favorite by far, which I would never have guessed. I'm like seriously guys? This is something I'm making out of scraps. Really not the most intricate or interesting pattern I was talking about in that episode, but everybody is like, I'm loving your blanket. And maybe it's because how enthusiastic I was talking about it, because clearly this is my guilty pleasure and knitting wise. It makes me very happy. So let me show it to you. It's growing. I've been adding more colors and squares to it, and now I'll have opportunity to add even more colors because my dear friend Vanessa, who you've heard about before on this podcast and will continue hearing about, so at some point she'll have to make an appearance on the podcast. There's no way around it. So she gave me a whole bunch of minis to put into this blanket. So she promised, and boy did she deliver. She also sent me a very beautiful photograph of these before they came my way. She's a very talented photographer, so I may pop it somewhere here, but just look at this. Look at this treasure. I never thought I would be as excited about scrap yarn as I am, and I can't wait to start putting these into the blanket. And I already started, so some of these squares that I just showed, they're coming from this pile. Beautiful colors. Just look at this one, how gorgeous. And that's another one, and there's more like muted colors. I'm telling you guys, this blanket is going to be a work of art, and Vanessa is now officially my most favorite person in the world. I can't wait to pop all of these into the blanket, and then can't wait to finish and see the end result and then use it and probably start another one right away. So yeah, the blanket is getting the love it deserves. So this is one of the newer additions, this one and this one and this one, on and on it goes. I haven't decided how big I want it to be, so I'm thinking maybe like 15 by 20, like talking in the number of squares, so that it's kind of a rectangle, but I guess we'll wait and see. But I still have some ways to go before that. I'm hoping to actually, every time I'm saying I need to put it aside to make progress on another thing, it just doesn't happen. So every night I feel like before I go to bed I need to pop in at least one square on this thing. So it is getting the love, and in case you've been worried about its fate, it's growing and coming along quite nicely. We'll keep you updated on the progress. So this takes me to the end of the knitting work, and next I wanted to talk about the treasure, as I call it, and these are some of the acquisitions and recent additions to my menu, to my stash, to my library related to knitting. I would have quite a lot to cover in this segment, but I have to split it and cover it piece by piece, because July was my birthday month, and I may have gotten carried away a bit in terms of yarn acquisitions. It just, some of it hasn't even arrived yet because I've been ordering for places like UK and Australia, and it takes time, and it's fine. I used to be really upset by how long sometimes it takes for things to show up at my doorstep, but now I actually like it, because sometimes you order something and you even forget about it, and then it arrives. I'm like, oh, it's a surprise from me to me. So that's awesome. Anyway, so today I wanted to cover just a couple of things in the treasure department, and let me just fetch them. So the first batch, so to speak, in the treasure department I want to talk about, I'm actually quite excited about, because it's not entirely bought. I actually contributed to making it the same weekend as I recorded the first episode, and I'm not sure if I mentioned it then. I probably didn't. Me and Vanessa, we took a yarn dyeing course at Unit's store in Toronto on Bloor West. Let me just tell you, after taking that course, I have a newfound respect for all the indie dyers out there. I don't know how you guys do it, how you come up with those vibrant, multicolored skeins that you also somehow manage to make repeatable, because there's so many variables you need to control that I hadn't realized that it's not even funny. The instructor said something in the beginning and I didn't fully appreciate it until the end of the class. She said that because it's your first time dyeing yarn, don't go in with this preconceived notion and the expectation that you're exactly going to get the result that you're aiming for, because it's not likely to happen. And boy, was she right. We dyed two different colors of yarn, two skeins of worsted in one color and one skein of single in another. I wanted to, the first color I wanted to make was this bright cerulean kind of blue, because it's a favorite color of one of my dear friends, and I wanted to make a shawl or scarf for her. I think I was fairly successful with this, at least with the shade of it, but maybe not as much with the intensity, because I was hoping for it to be much darker and richer, like the type of thing you see here on the tip of this strand. It didn't happen, but apparently, as the instructor explained, that blue is one of those colors that you need a lot of dye and a lot of heat and a lot of time for it to really be really saturated. Nevertheless, I'm still happy with what I got, at least shade wise. I think I got it right. And I kept adding color to the pot, and it kept absorbing it. But anyway, this is going to be a shawl, and I already have a pattern in mind for this. The second color, it was supposed to be like, my plan was for it to be this bright neon lemony yellow, speckled with either black or brown, that very defined tiny speckles at places. For some reason, I'm craving yellow lately. I don't know what it is. This is what I got. So as you can see, it's not quite yellow. I mean, not yellow at all. It's still quite a lovely autumnal kind of color. I have no complaints. I'm not exactly sure what I'm gonna do with it. Probably brioche it with something like gray. There could be another meandering shawl in the works here. This is my first stash treasure batch. that I also participated in making. Next one I want to talk about is my order from Nora George. I was inspired by actually watching a Little Bobbins knitting podcast, and on that podcast I saw this ruler for measure and gauge. It looked like this is a tool that could make it quite like an easy, almost child's play thing to do, because measure and gauge is not my favorite thing to do about knitting. So I decided I should give it a try. So I went on Nora George's site and I ordered this ruler, actually 3 of them for me and my 2 knitting friends. If you've been to Nora George's site, you know you cannot go there and leave with just a ruler. So there are 2 skeins of yarns that just made their way into my shopping basket, and I couldn't say no to them just because look at them. This is the first one, and the colorway is Mr. Knightley. This is the base is 75% superwash marine, 25% nylon, and it feels really nice. I really quite like this base. It's a sock yarn clearly, but the kind that's like not too thick, not too thin. I think it's just right. And this speckle on it is so gorgeous. I don't feel it would be right to make it into socks. I think the color is so beautiful, it needs to be displayed more prominently. So I can also say the same thing about the second one that I bought from on the same day. The color is Fleckle and it's the same base. So look at this gorgeous yellow. And all the other colors with some fuchsia here. It's just beautiful, and I really like this part when there's a combination of yellow and dark purple. I don't know, there could be another fade sweater in the making. Just couldn't be happier. I also got a card in that shipment that says, "I have enough yarn, said no knitter ever." I'm like, yep, can totally relate to that message, definitely true about me. And she also included a couple of stitch markers, which is of my favorite kind, and you can't really have too many stitch markers. And it's so great when you know you get a shipment and there's something a little extra included. Makes you feel like you want to go and order more from the same place right away. So the last addition to my treasure is the latest issue of Pom Pom magazine. It arrived a couple of days ago. I haven't had a chance to look at it in detail, but as I flip through it, there's a beautiful pair of colorwork mittens here that caught my eye. As you can tell, I'm totally hooked on colorwork mittens. Here they are, and I really quite like the pattern on these. It's like this modern kind of take on Fair Isle. I'm pretty sure I'll be making them at some point after I'm done with the Selbu Mitten Club. Maybe if I can squeeze them in between, that would be good. I'm pretty certain if I dive deep enough into my stash, I can find the yarn that would work for these, so I probably wouldn't need to buy. So there are some exciting designers here: Olga Burek, Efelian, Nancy Marchand, Fiona Alice, Emilia Jensen. So it's definitely worth checking out. I'm gonna be flipping through it this weekend and probably adding things to my ever-growing queue. So this takes us to the end of the knitting content. I'm really enjoying making this podcast, so I hope you enjoy watching it as much as I do. Thank you very much for tuning in and sticking till the end. I'll have to give some thought to whether I can maybe increase the frequency, maybe start recording on a weekly basis, just to make the episode length more manageable, because clearly I have a lot to say about knitting. I'll have to consider the trade-off, which is sacrificing my precious knitting time. So it's kind of the more time I spent about talking about knitting, the less I'll have to show, which would not be good, right? It wouldn't kind of definitely take away from the quality of the podcast if I don't have much progress to show in terms of my own knitting. But maybe it will give me extra motivation to be extra productive, so that I have stuff to talk to you about. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But for now, as I said last time, the minimum goal I'm setting for myself with this podcast is to make it to at least 10 episodes, and then we'll see how this goes. So far, I find this a very enjoyable experience. I hope you like it as well. That way we can both kind of benefit from each other's time. So thank you very much for watching again. And for those of you who are knitters, I wish you happy knitting. For those of you who are not knitters yet, I believe you should seriously consider picking it up. It's an excellent hobby. I highly recommend it. I cannot say enough about how much I am enjoying it. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.